The cigarette smoke chokes me, but I don't let myself cough. Instead, I keep it inside. Everything in me wants to let it out, expel it like some kind of poison disagrees with my organs. Still, I keep it inside. It's my first cigarette ever, in a classroom far away from the populated part of the school. I won't let myself look like a wimp, not in front of her. I couldn't give a crap about the popular kids standing with us in the room. I've never felt the need to care about them. However, when I heard the girl of my dreams was going with them, I just had to be there. That's pretty much how I found myself here. No one goes here anymore. Not after that kid died. Honestly, it was kinda sad. Some poor little girl gets lost and ventures into a neglected and dangerous part of the school on her own, on her very first day at that, and has a large table fall on her and injure her pretty badly. Then, slowly, she loses her life as she bleeds out. You'd expect there to be an outcry of some sort, yet the school pushes the blame onto the parents and bashes them. The local paper joins in, and before you know it, the whole town is bullying this family about not teaching their child proper safety rules. A 7-year-old girl was supposed to be taught proper safety rules. It sounds as ridiculous as it actually is. What do we get from all this? We get lectures on how we, as students, should keep the younger students safe. We get ghost stories that quickly spread across the school about the young girl and how she can still be heard crying. We get a special assembly today on the 1-year anniversary of her death, an assembly where we have a moment of silence for her. But don't worry, guys, refreshments are provided. Seems like everyone around here is an insensitive bastard. I pause my thought to find Alicia looking at me. I take another deep pull off the cigarette I'm holding. I take it better this time. I still feel the need to cough, but not as intense as before. Is this what romance is worth? Because as my brain gets cloudy and I drown in nicotine, it seems worth it. That is when the crying starts. I almost didn't hear it at first. It was soft, but definitely audible. I turn around, but there's nothing. We all start looking around. Have we been caught? None of our teachers would make that soft a sound if they caught us. Must be a small animal. Then it dawns on us all at once, and a nervous chuckle takes over the room. It can't be the stories about the dead girl. It just can't. It's probably just someone playing a prank on us. Still, the whole group slowly but surely creeps towards the door. No one admitting they're scared, but everyone ready to run at the same time. I take another pull off the cigarette, then I hear another cry. It's time for us to go. However, a thud behind us makes us turn around, and then a slam behind us makes us turn around again. Something distracts us, something in the dark of the room, just long enough for us to turn away from the door, long enough for it to slam shut. We're all trapped now. Everyone's scrambling, trying to open the door. The cool kids are still nervously chuckling, thinking it must just be the wind. However, the wind can't close a door hard enough for it to feel like it's been welded to the door frame. We can't get out of the room. That's becoming clearer now. You see, the thing about the light and the dark is that you can see in either one. The other just has to be absent. As the door blocks out the light from outside, the room inside becomes clearer. The dark corner is now taking shape. There's a desk there, a large, heavy one, and underneath it is a small frame. It looks like a doll, but it's faintly moving. It has to be a child. I'm not an idiot, not by any means. I'm a skeptic, definitely, but not an idiot. I'm seeing a ghost live out its last moments, a child live out her last moments. The cigarette is on the floor now, and so am I. We've all fallen to the floor, unable to move. I look around me, and it seems like we've been pinned by an invisible force. It sounds ridiculous, but it makes sense. A force more powerful than our meek bodies can handle. She's not living her last moments. We're living her last moments. I feel like I'm about to die. I'm not ready for this. I'm too young. I just want to go home to see my family. I just want to go back to class. I was so excited to see my friends today, to be around people who I care about. All things that she must have thought about. All things I'm thinking about now. I turn my head, and she's in the corner, sobbing. A child with nowhere to go, and no one to help her. Yet she keeps asking for help. I can't die here. I hope she gets help. I hope I get help. That's when I realize she never got help. And maybe neither will I. We're all going to die here, and I'm terrified by that thought. But I'm not the one I should be afraid for. My life, as scared as I am, doesn't matter. I should be helping the one that looks at me and sees me as someone older, someone who could have helped her. I turn to her and look in her eyes, into the eyes of the dying child, and speak to her. It's going to be okay, I say to her. It's all I can say with the weight on my chest. It's all I need to say. She stops sobbing and looks at me, almost as if she trusts me. I wish I could help, but I can't. The weight is now off my chest. Every one of us is able to get up. Every one of us is able to leave. And so is she. She disappears. I hope that it knows that wherever it's going to be okay. Outside the school, emergency services are waiting. Apparently, the same thing happened to every single person in school. They didn't see the ghost, but they did feel pinned down. Authorities are blaming it on a gas leak from years of neglect by the people in charge. When I hear that, I start to chuckle. I wonder who they're going to pin the blame on this time. You ever heard of Millie, the hanged lady? That's what Josh, my best friend, asked me one night while we were camping in the woods. Seriously, is this another story you made up, Josh? Asked Sue skeptically. No, this is 100% true, seriously. You guys never heard of this? I shrugged my shoulders in denial. Josh loved telling stories, especially the urban legends he'd read on the internet. Most likely he'd prepared a dozen of them in advance for tonight. The story begins one night in the forest. Forest where we just happened to be, Josh began seriously. I smiled out of the corner of my mouth and exchanged a glance with Sue, who knew as well as I did, now that he was off and running, there was no stopping him. You see, Millie was a high schooler like the three of us, and ever since she was a little girl, she'd been picked on by the other kids. Millie was different from the others. She always kept to herself, didn't dare speak up, didn't mix well with the others, and soon she became the target of others' abuse. Over the years, her reputation followed her, and the harassment from the other kids in her class became increasingly cruel. Sue kept her neutral expression, but I I could feel that the story touched her. She, too, had struggled to fit in after her parents had moved her here, and it was only after befriending Josh and me that she'd managed to come out of her shell. But if she hadn't, she might have been subjected to the kind of behavior on display here, too. In fact, she had confessed to me that this had even been the case at her previous school. One wintry evening, several students decided to play a prank on Millie, Josh continued, the flames from the campfire reflecting his eyes. They all grabbed scary masks and armed themselves with knives and chased Millie as she made her way home through the forest. Millie was terrified, and she fled as far as she could. She got lost in the forest. The story goes that during the night, cold, lost, and hungry, she found a rope stretched over a branch, like an invitation. And that was where she ended her life. What a horror, Sue said, still captivated by the tale. Since then, they say she haunts these woods, and that it's possible to summon her by repeating certain words. Cut the crap, I said uncomfortably. I swear it's true. All you have to do is stand in front of a branch and say, Millie, Millie, why are you so alone? 3 times. Then turn around and say, Millie, Millie, come talk to me. Just once. Then you'll hear the sound of a rope swinging under the weight of her body. And the story goes, if you're unfortunate enough to turn around and look at her, she'll kill you. Okay, that's definitely nonsense. No, really, Josh. You had me going at first, but I don't believe it anymore, Sue said, standing up. You'll excuse me, boys, but I'm going to hit the sack. Good night, and don't stay up too late tomorrow. We're leaving early. With that, she headed off to her tent. Josh and I stayed up a while, staring at the fire in silence, but as if he couldn't hold back any longer, he finally asked, Do you want to do it? Do what? I asked him. Well, repeat the sentence and everything. Come on, we've been walking around picking mushrooms all day. What the hell? I had a feeling that if I didn't agree, he'd ask me every night until I gave in. So, I preferred to take the lead. We found ourselves in front of a branch a few dozen feet from the camp, where the fire was beginning to fade. We had equipped ourselves with our flashlights to see where we were going. Josh seemed pretty excited. Have to admit that once we got to the branch, I was more apprehensive than I would have imagined about some stupid urban legend. You're the one doing it, Josh told me. Why me? It was your idea. It was your story. But I've already done it 15 times. Come on, it's your turn, man. Don't back down now. I huffed. This was pretty typical of Josh. I stood in front of the branch, flashlight in hand. Josh gave me the sentence to repeat 3 times, and with a stutter or two, I managed to get it right. I turned around, my back to the branch. Josh stood next to me because he said if he looked, it wouldn't work. Millie, come talk to me, I finally said in a whisper. Hey, don't shit yourself, Josh laughed. We waited for a few moments. Well, I don't hear any taunt rope noises. I guess that means I get to live. Maybe she was busy elsewhere tonight, Josh replied with a laugh. Come on, let's go to bed. It's starting to freeze out here. We headed back to the camp. I couldn't help but look back for a moment while holding my lamp in front of me. For a moment, I could have sworn I saw something moving from right to left near the tree where we'd been for a few moments. Damn, I really got to stop listening to Josh's stories. I was awakened sometime later by a scream. I scrambled to my feet, ears pricked and wondering if I'd imagined it. I could see through the canvas of my tent that it was still dark outside. Josh, Sue? I called aloud, our tents being right next to each other. No answer. Why the hell aren't they answering? If they're playing a prank on me, I'm going to kill them. I grabbed the flashlight from my tent, my cell phone, and quietly stepped out. Josh, Sue? I asked again. I lit up their tent in turns and noticed they were both open. and empty. I couldn't remember clearly what I'd heard, but I thought the scream was from a girl. I couldn't believe for a second that Sue would participate in a prank like this, but if it wasn't that, then maybe something serious had happened. As I stood there trying to think about where they might have gone and what they might be doing, a strong wind blew. To my right, a few dozen feet away, I spotted something moving. "Josh, I swear to God, if this is one of your stupid jokes," I said as I slowly approached, my flashlight trying to shine through the vegetation around me. I walked towards where I thought I'd seen the movement, and finally I saw something just to my right moving again. Slowly, heavily, I heard the sound of a taut rope. I shone my flashlight from bottom to top, and there I saw Josh, hanging by his neck with a rope tied to a branch over a tree. I was silent for a few seconds at the shock. "Josh, please, stop this." His face was contorted in an expression of sheer terror. Eyes revolted back. His skin was blue, lifeless. I nudged him with my hand, and he just rocked back and forth a little. I couldn't believe it. It must have been an elaborate prank on his part. It wasn't possible. Not Josh. He was glowing with life. He would never take his own life like that, in the middle of the night, on a camping trip. The reality finally dawned on me, and I was overcome by a violent sob. My legs buckled, and I threw up on the ground. As I wiped my mouth, my eyes misty with tears, I heard something impossible. The sound of a taut rope slowly swinging right behind me. I straightened up, the sensation of mortal danger just behind my neck. "Who's there?" I asked, my voice trembling and still tight. The rope suddenly stopped moving. "Why don't you look at me?" said a feminine voice from beyond the grave, whose windpipe seemed to be strangled. What? "Your friend looked at me. Look at him now. He's so much happier here with me." I remained silent, my eyes fixed in front of me, as if frozen in place. "It's impossible. She can't be real. You're having a nightmare. Wake up, wake up, wake up. Look at me." I ran. I didn't know where, and I didn't care. She'd killed Josh, and now this thing, whatever it was after me. After a minute, I remembered Sue's scream. She must have been awakened like me, maybe by Josh getting up, or when he'd been killed. She must have discovered the corpse, too. With any luck, she'd managed to escape. I figured if she'd gone off with her cell phone, she'd have tried to escape to the nearest road, which was about 15 miles, even though there was no way she could get there before the night was over. I tried calling the police and my parents without success, but luckily the GPS still seemed to work, so I followed the direction. I was walking fast, so as not to collapse on the ground from exhaustion. I was already out of breath, and I couldn't stop. I always made sure to aim my flashlight at the ground in front of me to be on the safe side. The urban legend Josh had told me had said that you had to turn around and look at her for her to kill you, so maybe I shouldn't look her in the eye. I felt like I was being stalked. I flinched at every movement of a branch in the wind, and I constantly felt eyes on the back of my neck. But I was too scared to turn around. I had to get the hell out of the forest. "Sorry, Josh. I promise I'll come back for you as soon as I find some help." I spotted an abandoned cabin we'd seen on the way here. I remembered that Sue had said that this was where we would find shelter if there was a storm or something. Suddenly I saw a light pierce the darkness through the wooden planks of the cabin. I sprinted towards it. "Sue! Sue, I'm coming!" I shouted out of breath. I stepped inside, the boards creaking beneath my feet. The light streamed in from under the door, and the cabin only had the one bedroom. I crossed the space between me and the door, glad I'd found Sue before I fled this place. I put my hand on the door handle. "Sue?" I paused. Silence was unnatural. Something was wrong. "Sue, are you okay?" I asked through the door, my hand still on the handle. "Answer me, please. You're freaking me out. Josh is dead, and the thing that killed him is still around. We need to get the hell out of here." No response. "Sue!" I noticed the light moving under the door, as if someone was holding the strap at the end of their finger and swinging right to left. "No, no, 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 no," I said in horror. In response, a childish laugh rang out from behind the door. I ran to the front door, which opened with a shove on my shoulder, and ran straight out of there. After a minute, I collapsed on the ground. It forced me to stop and think about what had happened. Maybe it wasn't Sue. Maybe this thing had managed to grab a flashlight and was just playing games with me. After all, I had no idea the extent of its abilities. I kept my eyes on my knees as I pondered what I'd seen. Then I heard it. The sound which I could now detect amongst any other sound. The sound of a rope stretching taut, swinging from left to right. Sound wasn't coming from behind me this time. It was from my left. I could feel her sinister gaze, inviting me to look at her and sealing my death in the process. I stood up, eyes on my feet, and started to run to my right, but I was stopped in my tracks. The sound of the rope was now coming from just ahead. Without thinking, I turned in the opposite direction. Again, sound was coming from right in front of me. She's everywhere. I'm screwed. I stood there with my eyes on my feet, trying to think of a solution. Josh was dead. Sue was missing, maybe dead too, and this running around all night. I closed my eyes, and tears quickly formed at the ends. I had an idea. Legend said that it was looking at her that allowed her to kill you. What if I just kept moving forward, looking at my feet, or even closed my eyes? The idea of walking through the forest with my eyes closed sent a chill down my spine. But what other choice did I have? I've been squatting here for several minutes now, writing this message. I've tried to call the police, but every time I call, all I get is static. I don't know where Sue is or how to get rid of this thing. I'm alone, I'm cold, and I'm exhausted. If you're reading this, please help me. Please help me. Started renting this house a few weeks ago. It was a nice 2-bed, 1-bath with 2-car garage, sizable driveway. The grass was in good health, and the wooden fence was always painted a bright, clean shade of white every few weeks. It was like a house from the 50s, because it was. There was something charming about it. Wooden paneling, the porch with the backyard deck, grill, cozy little shack out back full of tools, and the lawnmower. I was allowed to rent this out for as long as I needed, so I could write a report about a murder. One that just so happened to have taken place in this very house. Back in the 60s, a couple lived here. They were crazy about each other, and about some of the neighbors as well. For over 2 decades, they poisoned, stabbed, and shot various other families. It was never clear why they did it, or what motivated them to do it in the first place. In the end, it was chalked up to pure insanity. A pair of psychopaths married together. They had a son and a daughter, but the grandparents had taken them out of the household after finding out about the first murder. They kept it quiet, of course. The house has been turned into a sort of museum and rental space over the past few years. It was closed off to the public for over 3 decades, but recently it opened back up for people to look at. Turns out that renting out and giving tours of a haunted house was profitable. Who'd have figured? Oh, I forgot to mention that it was haunted by the souls of the couple who killed those families back in the day. That was something I was having a hard time documenting in the report I was writing. I mean, come on. Haunted house? The hell is this? A horror novel? I was dead wrong about it, though. It all started one night when this one song started playing on the phonograph in the living room. It was Put Your Head on My Shoulder by Paul Anka. Can't get it out of my head. Played over and over every night. The nights would go the same way, over and over. I would go to bed around 10 p.m., and after that, the house would fall into an odd silence. The lights came on in the living room, and that song would just start playing all by itself. The movement of footsteps could be heard as they creaked against the hardwood floor. "Please, come out and join us. It's quite a fun night," a female voice would call out. "Come now, be our guest. Take a seat out here. We'll drink tea and listen to the radio," a male voice would soon follow up with the woman's voice. It's not safe to get up and check it out, despite their words of assurance. Doing so could bring unknown results. It may have been safe, but something in my body told me otherwise. I'd stay in bed until 6 a.m. That's the time that everything would fade away and turn to normal. The little dance and music would go on all night, but I would still be able to sleep. While dozing off, it seemed like the music would go silent despite still playing. I guess their only goal at first was to draw me out. It's been a few days of this before things took a step up. I've been hearing, I don't know quite how to put it, people. It's almost like a party's going on during the night hours. Again, I find that I cease to hear it once I fall asleep. Guess these little events are mere attempts at giving incentive for me to leave the room rather than to torture me. Although, every so often, they'll knock on the door and ask me to come out again. It only lasts a few seconds before the person walks away. They're real polite about it, though, and they don't stick around. They just ask and then vanish once they don't hear an answer. During the daytime, I've been logging this information into my report. Feels like I'm going insane a little. This can't be real, right? I must be breathing some kind of hallucinogenic gas or something. Got the vents checked, but nothing's wrong with them. They did need to be cleaned, though, so at least I had an excuse to get them worked on without looking like a crazy person. I never found a trace of this couple during the day. No shoes, no footprints, nothing moved. Nothing. Not a single goddamn thing out of place or touched. Hell, things seem slightly cleaner in the morning. Maybe the fact that I try to keep things as they were, though. I spend my days walking around the neighborhood. People living around here are mostly millennials, the ones who either inherited these houses and chose to rent them out or live in them instead of selling them, or renting them to cut down on certain parts of the mortgage. I drive into town and head to a coffee shop I like for a few hours. I'll leech off the free Wi-Fi so I can get my things done. There's free Wi-Fi at the house, but it's a gamble on the speed and the connection. I also like starting my day off with coffee and going about my hours to get a cake and a few sandwiches. It's now been 3 weeks and I think I'm almost done. I was given 4 weeks before the deadline to make a report on the house so the people I work for can get some info. They're not exactly well informed since most of the people have either died, killed themselves, or simply walked out after a few days. The only reason I've survived this long is that I've read every last bit of data I could find from both historical records and the half-assed papers people put together before throwing their badges to the side and working for another newspaper. I'm barely getting anything interesting so far, aside from the fever dream of a stay I'm getting from this place. These days, during the 3rd week, have been pretty weird. I wake up at the same time only to hear humming, Musical humming, not particular songs, just random notes. This is the wife humming while making some sort of breakfast. Her name's Rose, and her husband is Clark. Can't believe I've been referring to them as husband and wife all this time. It changes during the day, but it ranges from bacon and eggs to cereal and orange juice with toast to a full pancake breakfast sometimes. They got bigger and bigger each day. On day one, I stayed in my room until the humming stopped. It only lasted about 15 to 20 minutes. After that, I would check the kitchen to find a freshly cooked breakfast. Rose wasn't anywhere in sight, though. I was hesitant to eat it at first, since I wasn't sure what would happen, but I was hungry that morning, and I didn't feel like making a drive to the city so early in the morning. Food was good. I didn't feel poisoned or anything afterwards. I would set the dishes in the sink and take a shower. Not even 15 minutes after getting out of the shower and getting dressed, the dishes were washed, dried, and sitting in the cupboard. I'm honestly not sure why people have been dying or quitting this trip. So far, I've stayed out of their way and never really messed with anything. I feel like a guest here, and act as one, which is probably the key. You can't live here, merely stay for a certain amount of time. I don't know how long that time frame is, though. Week 4, these last 7 days are my final chance to wrap this up before the deadline. I'm nowhere closer to finding out how these past journalists died, why this couple did what they did, or anything like that. The best I'm going to do is probably pump out a short guide on how not to die here. This week was the hardest. The haunting extended all day. You see, the morning would start out as normal as it had last week. Waking up, hearing the humming, waiting for it to stop, eating a little breakfast, putting the dishes in the sink, etc. The real difference is they're now visible and active, all day and night. Clark spends his days sitting on an armchair reading a newspaper. Funny detail is that the date on the newspaper follows our date, only the month and day, not the year. He's always dressed in a white dress shirt with the top button left undone. Simple, ironed black dress pants with a leather belt neatly wrapped around them. Brown leather shoes, more like loafers actually, I guess. Kind of dress shoes you just kind of slip on. They were always shined and cleaned. His right leg is on the floor with his left leg stretched out over the right. The newspaper covers his face. The only thing that could be seen from the other side was the occasional cigarette smoke puffing up. The cigarette never had a scent, though. Phantom tobacco, I guess. Pretty funny. Rose would be sitting on the couch most of the time, either knitting, reading a magazine, or watching the TV. It was a large black and white TV, the outside made of hardwood, the thick glass of the display, and the antenna sticking out of the top. Can't miss those 2 large dials on it either. There was always something different on TV. One moment it was a cooking show, the news, even a Western movie. The volume was always able to be heard, but sort of faint as well. Kind of like a sort of background noise you barely notice after a while. It was not a good idea to verbally or physically interact with them in any way. Not even looking at them was an option. I've never seen either of their faces outside of photos because I'm always staring at my phone or laptop, or even intentionally staring at the floor. The carpet was kind of pleasant to look at. They never spoke during the day. Rose would sometimes clean the house, sometimes dust, vacuum, even washing the dishes. I lied. I've caught small glimpses of their faces from reflections. They are in their young age for the 60s, the prime of their life, right before the major killing streak. I can't even explain any of this. This house could slowly be turning into a self-contained instance of time. But that wouldn't make sense since the Wi-Fi here works. My money is up to date and my tech can be charged. A few of the outlets have swapped out for modern ones. Only the ones not already connected to appliances or the TV itself. Breakfast, lunch, dinner would always appear on the table at different times of the day. Breakfast at 6 a.m., lunch at noon, dinner at 6 p.m. I would always eat in silence and put the dishes in the sink. I've tried rinsing the dishes before at least, but the water never touches them. I don't know how to explain it, but I would turn on the water and it would just phase through the dishware. I gave up after one day. Well, this is the final day. I'll be scheduling this report to send itself in a few hours. I don't even want to manually do it since I'm rinsing my hands of this whole worthless paper once I leave. There was one thing I wanted to check out though. I'm gonna continue this bit on my phone. I always wanted to check out the basement. I forgot that it even existed this whole time. The door wasn't blocked or locked, luckily. The door just opened up, but the light bulb turned on for about a second before blowing out. It didn't actually explode or anything, but the light sort of just flashed and burned out like a flashbang. The steps are quite loud as they creak. I'm not sure what that smell is, like a mixture of gas and rotten meat, maybe? The door just closed itself, the only light I have down here from my phone flashlight. There's some kind of red puddle leading to a room down here. I don't like it. I'm writing this live so my boss can read it. Yeah, I know, hard to believe I'm actually being productive. The puddle's blood. There's a body down here. No, wait, there's multiple bodies down here. I can see dozens or even hundreds of flies just covering these bodies. I think I recognize some of the badges around their neck. All of these bodies smell fresh. Is time frozen down here or something? Shoot! There's footsteps coming down here. I'm squeezed behind a broken down fridge. Maybe Clark will give up his search in a few minutes. My 911 alert just failed. This one message will probably be the last thing that'll automatically upload. I think I just made a horrible mistake. I wasn't supposed to come down here. If you're reading this, please call for connection lost. Report upload incoming. I recently got to rent out a house from the 60s. The house was famous because of a couple that used to live here from the 60s to the 80s. They were known for killing people and families during that time period before finally being caught by the police. These were the things I've learned during my stay in this house. During the first week, there will be dancing. From 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., there will be activity in the living room. The couple will appear out there and dance to a song called Put Your Head on My Shoulder, along with a few others. They will assure you that it's fine if you come out and join them. Don't do it. I've never attempted, so I don't know if anything happens. But trust your gut. During week 2, they will be hosting a party. The sound of many people will come from the living room, as if people have come over for the evening. Every few hours, the door will knock as someone on the other side will invite you to join them. During week 3, the haunting will break into the day. During the morning, the wife will be in the kitchen, making breakfast. Do not leave your room until she's done. You can use the bathroom, but don't look or enter the kitchen. You will hear her hum for about 20 minutes. Once it stops, you can go about your day. Food's perfectly fine to eat and is actually encouraged. Make sure you put the dishes in the sink. During week 4, if you survive that long, they will roam the house 24/7. Do not make eye contact with either of them. They'll mainly stay in the living room. The husband sitting on the armchair reading a newspaper, the wife reading a magazine or knitting. Occasionally she'll clean the house. If you're going to be in the living room, keep your eyes low and do not verbally interact with them. If you do, I'm not sure. There have been reports of them killing people during this time. Acting hostile at them or trying to kill them will not end well. Many have rented this place out, and almost all of them have died. Some were filled with stab wounds. Some were in the tub, drowned. Others were framed as if it were a suicide. You may wonder why the government hasn't merely torn the house down. I'm not sure. Seems like the money they make from this place keeps it running longer. They will not force themselves into the room during the night. Unless you interact with them, they will not attack or come your way. Any food or snacks prepared is fully safe and encouraged to consume. Make sure you set the dishes and the silverware in the sink. They will be cleaned. Stay outside of the house. It's your best chance to live. Follow the rules. You might make it out alive. My name's John. I'm in my 20s and I just moved out of my parents' house. I'm in search of lower cost living, and I decided to move to a small town in Rainville Bay, southwest Michigan. It's one of those American towns you see in movies, spaced out houses, all built similarly. Most of the residents are elderly, making it very quiet for most of the year. No noisy parties, speeding cars, or anything like that, which I particularly love. However, shortly after moving, I noticed something weird. My neighbor, Mr. Anderson, has a peculiar habit of lighting a candle every night, religiously, at about 11:50 p.m., and placing it in his window. He stands there for about 15 minutes, gazing at it, and then he goes to sleep. On nights of strong wind or rain, he tends to shield it with something similar to a lantern. My curiosity was piqued, and I really wanted to know what it was all about. Was it a superstition? A local tradition, ancient enough for only the oldest or elderliest to remember? I don't even know how to ask him about it. I briefly mentioned it to an elderly woman, Mrs. Percy, a very kind neighbor who often shows up at my door with sweets and cakes. When I asked, however, she simply changed the subject, and this has happened more than once. One day, gathering my courage to approach Mr. Anderson directly, I walked up to his door and knocked. He opened with a friendly enough smile, and I hesitantly started asking him about the candle. He listened to my question, and for a moment, his eyes seemed pretty distant, as if recalling something. Then, he simply told me it was a family tradition, nothing for me to worry about. Unsatisfied with the vague answer, I tried to insist for more details, but he politely closed the door, saying he preferred to keep family traditions a secret. I was frustrated, but my curiosity only grew. I decided to search for information at the small cultural center in town, hoping to find some record that explained the tradition or someone who could shed some light on it. However, my efforts were in vain. The files were scarce, and the few available details on Rainville Bay didn't mention anything about lighting candles. I tried talking to the officials who handled the center, but they acted similarly to Mrs. Percy. Gradually, all this denial of information became an obsession for me. I waited all night by the window, just waiting for the moment when he would light his candle. On a holiday eve, I even stayed up all night to see if the candle could go out or when he would remove it. He removed it at exactly 5:55 a.m. I was running out of ideas. For a while, I even kept an eye on the neighbors' houses, watching if they would do the same. For some reason, only Mr. Anderson had this habit. With few options left, I went for my emergency plan. On that day, at exactly 11:50, I placed a candle in my window and lit it. It had been an intense work day, and I really needed to sleep, but I just couldn't. I sat in an uncomfortable chair in my room, facing the candle to avoid falling asleep. It didn't work so well because, slowly, Orpheus called me with his sweet song, leading me to Hypnos's arms. I relaxed, unconscious, when I heard a noise that made me jump from my chair. It was knocks, something hitting against the wood of my door. I looked through the window and saw Mr. Anderson at my doorstep. He knocked once more. "I need to come in," he shouted. "Let me in." I rushed down the stairs, still confused with everything. I approached the door as the pleas intensified, but when I reached the door, about to grab the handle, something triggered my instinct. I felt there was something wrong, and I decided to check before opening. I approached the peephole, staring at the one who disturbed my sleep. He was there, the familiar neighbor, but different. His mouth was open at an unconventional angle. His voice didn't come from his lips. It seemed to emanate from the black hole that was his mouth. His eyes darted frantically from side to side, unfocused on anything. From his chin, a thick foam dripped, forming puddles on the floor. His arms were bleeding and twisted, seemed crushed by the wood. Judging by the way they contorted, the blows intensified, almost as if the door was about to come off its hinges. I ran to one of the cabinets and pushed it to block the passage. It went on like that till about 5:50 a.m. I wondered why no neighbors had woke up with all this racket. I saw him through the window returning to his home, entering at exactly 5:55 a.m., appearing at his window to remove the candle. The rest of the day was a nightmare. I was sleep-deprived and had to drink about 5 cups of coffee to make it through the workday. The sleepless night left me like a human wreck. I had to go to work in that state, and the 5th cup of coffee in my hand felt like an illusionary comfort as I tried to stay awake. I couldn't help but think about the events of the previous night, the image of Mr. Anderson desperately banging on my door, haunting my thoughts with every blink. At the end of the workday, I decided I needed to understand what was going on. I took the way back home, nervous and tense. The town was shrouded in a peculiar silence, and the lights of the house hummed faintly. The street was deserted, with no signs of life besides me and the small details that made up the landscape, like the occasional passing car or barking dog. As I approached the home, I spotted Mr. Anderson in the distance. A wave of terror hit me, and I thought about turning back, avoiding the inevitable encounter. However, something inside me insisted that I needed to face the situation. He was walking slowly towards me, completely normal. His friendly and welcoming smile was back, in contrast to the hole that had been his mouth the night before. He waved when our eyes met. The scene was so distinct from the disturbing image of the previous night that I almost questioned my own sanity. "Afternoon, John," he greeted, as if nothing had happened. "Good afternoon, Mr. Anderson," I replied, trying to keep calm even though my heart was still racing. I hoped he would mention something about the previous night, but he continued the conversation as if nothing was different. We talked about the weather, the neighborhood, trivial things that made no sense in the face of the terrible experience we had shared. I was eager to get inside, past him, and went in, but before closing the door, I couldn't help but ask, "Mr. Anderson, are you okay?" He frowned, as if trying to remember, but shrugged. "Oh, the usual, young man. A backache here and there, but nothing major." I didn't know what to think. His answer was so casual, as if I were imagining things. He greeted me, and I saw that there weren't any scars, let alone wounds on his hands or arms. Could it have been my imagination? Unfortunately not. I'm well aware of that now, because night after night, he comes to scream at my window, saying he needs to come in, regardless of whether I have a candle lit or not. Believe me, I've tried both solutions with no result. Really starting to get used to it. It wouldn't be such a big problem till yesterday. I was setting up the desk to block the door as usual. I had already put the furniture on standby when Mr. Anderson started his noisy night. I was about to go to my room, put on my headphones, and get some sleep when I passed the staircase facing the back door, and then, while my neighbor screamed desperately that he needed to come in, I heard a single knock on the door in front of me. Since I lit a candle in my window, my neighbors ask every night for me to let them in, and now there's something knocking on my back door, too. I always wanted to be a writer, ever since I was in 2nd grade. Over the course of my life, I got pretty good at it. Even got to the point where companies were paying me large salaries to take their ideas and turn them into stories and ad campaigns. By the time I was 30, I generated millions of dollars, spun up a portfolio that could land me any job, and made a name for myself in professional writing circles. But there was one thing I was missing: the ability to come up with good ideas. Now, you may think that in my position, that didn't matter much. Companies gave me the ideas, I brought them to life, and I made a lot of money doing it. Why did my lack of ideas really matter? They mattered because money didn't matter to me. Ideas did. I didn't want to be a professional writer. I wanted to be a creative one. I wanted to tell stories that chilled my readers, turned their stomach, broke their hearts. I wanted to create characters that men secretly cried over, and women openly lusted over in their book clubs. I wanted to paint settings that kept children up at night, and drove movie producers crazy. I wanted to be the best storyteller. The only way to do that was to come up with winning ideas. But I didn't have any, so I looked for them in prompt workbooks. I even stole them from other authors' stories. I went to the workshops and watched as my peers spent their time while I stared at blank papers and laptop screens. Nothing worked. My ideas were either soft and boring or unrealistic and uncompelling. Nothing that I conceived begged to be brought to life on the page, and when I forced them out, they always seemed to droop over as if they were empty bags without skeletons or muscles. They were husks without any of the human stuff that held a real person up. Unlike me, they didn't even have the disappointment or self-pity to stand on their own. I was 35 when my pathetic inability to come up with ideas finally overwhelmed me. I didn't remember exactly what caused it, but I was on my way home from yet another writing workshop with the local Writers Guild when I decided that my life had grown meaningless. I was going home to craft a story, and if I couldn't do it, I was going to take my own life. That, I decided, was at least a creative story that someone would remember. You might suspect that the ultimatum gave me a sense of fear, but for the first time in my life, something clicked. There were stakes, and I felt the strange brush of a story pass over me, gently hitting my cheek with its tail. It was gone before I could grab it, but once again, for the first time, I knew that it would come back. It had responded to the stakes. I sped the rest of the way home, eager and gleeful to see which way the story would unfold. Would the hero pass the test, or would he fall into darkness? I didn't know. I couldn't wait to find out. I nearly knocked down my front door in a rush to get to my desk. I didn't even bother to turn on any lights as I thundered upstairs and down the hall to my bedroom, all the way in the back. I even tripped over my cat, who was so startled by the change in my normally lethargic state that he was caught in a panic trying to figure out which way to run. Once I was in my bedroom, I lit a candle, opened my laptop, and felt all the momentum drain from the tip of my fingers. What was I going to write about? I hadn't had a single idea on my way home, but I'd felt them swimming around. They'd called out to me again and again, "Come to me, take me, expose me to the world." For the first time, they wanted me, but they were teasing little things, and now that it was time to get to business, they were hiding. It didn't bother me, though. I'd heard the whole spiel before. You had to start writing, and the story would come. So that's what I did, and they did start to come. I could feel them again, little threads brushing my cheeks, my arms, my hands, but I couldn't see them. They kept hiding just beyond the veil of reality. I could almost hear them laughing at me like little sprites, making childish bets among themselves about how long I would keep trying until I gave up for the last time. Well, I wasn't going to give up, I decided with a huff, but suddenly the stakes didn't feel so thrilling anymore. Instead, the reality of what I'd promised inflated in front of me, and I realized that I was going to tell a story one way or another, and I didn't want to tell the story I'd leveraged as collateral. But I didn't have a different story to tell, and I wasn't sure how long it would take me to make one, if I was even capable. But that didn't really matter, did it? This was going to end, one of two ways. I drummed my fingers on the desk for a while. Then I typed in random keys until I had a page full of J3R, 3R, 9S, and other random characters. But that didn't turn into a story, so I opted for a classic, Once Upon a Time. What came after that? I wasn't sure. I kept fidgeting with different things on my desk until my candle started to sputter, and I looked up to find that the wick was drowning in melted wax. I'd been sitting here wrestling with my ideas for hours, and all I had was a page full of random letters and numbers. I put my hands on my knees, preparing to stand up. Then I remembered my ultimatum. I wasn't ready for that yet. I'd felt the idea swimming by just hours earlier in the car. This was my chance to pin them down, and I wasn't about to get up, no matter how bored or hungry or thirsty or hopeless I felt. Plus, I didn't particularly want to die. I'd just said it because it felt story-like, and I hoped it would kickstart my creativity. With that in mind, I settled back down and tried to start my first sentence. I wrote, deleted, wrote again until I lost count. Finally, I had a first sentence when my eyes were starting to seriously droop, and the yawn became more and more frequent. I looked at my watch. It was 2 o'clock in the morning, far past my bedtime, but I was starting to feel it again, the wisp of a story thread brushing my cheek. I had a first sentence, and it was time to get to work. I kept writing. The progress was faster than ever before. By 4 a.m. I had 2 pages. By 5, I had half of another. But by 5:15, I was starting to slow down. My head was bobbing back and forth, and every few minutes I would wake up, surprised that I'd fallen asleep. I tried my best to look at the screen, but it was blurry. So blurry that I couldn't even read the words. It was time to go to sleep. I stood up and my legs gave out, sending me elbow first onto my desk. But I didn't feel it. The only thing I felt was joy. I'd done it. I had an idea. By this time, I didn't even know what it was about anymore, but I had an idea. I stumbled back down the hallway to the kitchen to get a glass of water. My cat protested loudly. He might have been hungry, but I couldn't really tell. I'd kept my door closed the entire time I'd been writing, so I hadn't seen him much. In the kitchen, I filled a glass of water and was halfway through gulping it down when I froze, letting the rest dump down my chest. "Peekaboo," slithered a dark, playful voice from the shape that had frozen mid-gulp. "Giving up so soon, are you?" I stared back at the 2 shining eyes, the only indication that something had been sitting on the couch in the first place. The shape stood and walked towards me, with a slow, deliberate pace. The next great American author, standing in his kitchen, a brilliant book sitting on his screen, just waiting to be finished, but he's ready to call it quits. By now, the figure was on the edge of the shadowed, carpeted square that made up my living room. He took another step, exposing a long, thin, suited leg. "Ah, it's 'cause you don't remember me, do you?" With that, the figure stepped out into the slat of gray morning light, making its way into the kitchen by the window. I stumbled backwards at the sight, but there wasn't far to go. My back was already against the sink. The thing that stepped out was no man, though that was the closest description anyone would have given. It was tall and skinny, almost to a sickly point. It wore a suit that was at least one size too big, so that the shoulders were too wide, the jacket too baggy, the sleeves too long, and the pants fell in rolls of fabric at his shoes. The only thing remotely normal about it was its face, which had the uncanny look of someone who could only be human, but on the very verge of being called so. It had a sharply contrasted jawline, huge cheekbones, overly tight lips, and sharp, bright eyes. Besides the thin, stringy hair that fell over its shoulders in unkempt, flat locks, the smile was the most memorable feature. It was a smart smile, devious and genuinely malicious, the kind of smile you'd see before someone completely innocent gets unfixedly hurt. "How are you gonna do it, Nathan? I've been sitting on the couch, brimming with ideas." "Oh, I'm sorry. Was that insensitive? What I mean is that you have options. You're clearly ready to exercise them, since you're in here. Come, sit down with me and we'll talk them out. I'm thinking grand." It gestured with a long, outstretched arm, motioning as if it wanted to put its arms around me and guide me like a friend. "Remember, this is your story moment." By this point, I had already backed myself onto the corner without realizing it, and now I must have looked like I was trying to pack myself into one of the cabinets. "Nathan," it started again, taking another step forward. Forgive me. My manners astound me sometimes. I didn't introduce myself." It bit its bottom lip and flashed its same grin. "My name is Promise." I leapt back down from the counter and sprinted down the hallway, where I threw the door closed and jumped onto my bed. Promise's chuckle echoed down the hallway. "I guess you're gonna keep working on that story, huh?" it called after me. I was nearly hyperventilating when I sat down at my desk again, but at least my eyes weren't blurry anymore. My mind and body were wide awake, although I wasn't entirely sure what had just happened was real. But what else could it have been? I asked myself sharply. Something was in my house. Something had been sitting on my couch, mocking me. Something that wasn't entirely human had just introduced itself to me. And it knew about my ultimatum, my promise. I breathed out, putting my face in my palms. It knew about my promise. I sat there with my head in my hands for a few minutes before I calmed down enough to think. I had two options: finish my story or run. I wasn't sure that running would help, so I slid off the bed and walked back over to my desk. I scrolled back up to the top of the page and started to read so I could get back on track. As soon as I started, a guttering emptiness spread from my stomach to my throat. The story that I'd been working on for nearly 12 hours was awful. The core idea, exploring the daily life of a man who's haunted by his childhood emotional neglect, was boring. The entire 3 pages were nothing but me spinning my wheels, writing about a man whose life was so dull that no one would want to read him anyway. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Instead, I felt the breathless weight of fear. Promise was waiting. Promise was eager for me to come out again, because he must know. He must know that my story was flat. He must know that my character was lifeless. He must know that I had no story kernel or any other idea that the other writers were always seeming to have. He could probably read my story right now, I thought with wild certainty. And it was no longer curiosity or creativity that drove me to my keyboard. Instead, it was wild desperation. In one move, I selected all the text and deleted it. When I tried to settle in, my breath was too heavy, and I could feel it. I knew he was there. Whether he was sitting on the couch or leaning against the door, I knew he was there. All I knew was he could hear the click-clack of the keys and the bang-bang of my heart. I was sure he could even hear my thoughts, and so I screamed as loud as I could in my head, "Not done, not done, not done," until my inner ear felt like it was bleeding and blunted. And then I was exhausted again. No energy, no ideas, just an ever-dulling knowledge that I had to finish this story. That's when I saw them. I looked down at the clock in the corner of my screen to check the time before getting back to work. It was 7:42. Morning sunlight was dancing through my window, and it caught something and sent a dazzling rainbow all around the room. It was gone in a moment, but I turned all around to look for it, and found it circling my head in wispy motions. A translucent butterfly with long threads hanging at the ends of its wings. As it flew around my head, the threads tickled my cheek, and I gasped. For the first time all night, it was my turn to smile. I'd made it through the night and been rewarded. An idea had graced me, a sacred muse in the form of a butterfly. My smile grew, and suddenly there were more flashes of light, more and more swimming in the air, catching the sunlight and sending dazzling refracted rainbows of light all around the room, directly into my eyes. So this was what it was like. So many of them at once, at least 50 ideas kissing my head with their threads. I'd waited my entire life. I'd prayed for this, sacrificed for this, but clearly I'd never sacrificed enough. Whoever'd been listening had needed more to send me a muse, and my life and the balance had been enough. I was ready, so I reached out and cupped my hand around the random butterfly, breathing deeply of its golden light, ready for ideas to flow through my nostrils and into my soul. But the moment I touched it, the butterfly disappeared as if it had never been. I sat back, shocked, then I inched my hands towards each other, ready to cup it and breathe it in, but it also disappeared as if it had never existed. I tried a third, and then, getting desperate, I tried to pluck a fourth out of the air. Both disappeared as soon as I touched them. Hot, heavy rage rose in my stomach. I plucked at another, and it was gone. I swung my head forward and tried to breathe in the group, but all I met was empty air. I slammed my hands together over a solitary tenth and opened them to find nothing but stinging red skin. Every time they disappeared in front of me, the butterflies would appear again in my peripheral vision, and they would multiply. Eventually, it became more detrimental to try to catch them, and I dropped into my chair and looked at my screen. By then, I could barely look at it for all the bright butterflies circling my head. But I had to. I hadn't forgotten who was out there, waiting in the shadows of the curtains I'd left drawn over the windows. I went on working like this for another 12 hours. I had to squint at my screen just to see, and I wrote and deleted more times than I could count. Eventually I started drifting off, and by 12 p.m. my eyes were screaming for a break, my bladder crying for relief, and my parched throat felt like it cracked with every breath. But I couldn't step outside the room until it was done. So I stood up and danced with the butterflies. I couldn't touch them, but at least dancing would show them I cared. I stumbled back and forth across the floor, falling into the vase I kept by my desk and sending it shattering to the carpet. I had an incredible, deep, shattering noise as pieces of porcelain rocketed across the room. My eyes must have grown as wide as the windows. At least that's how they felt to me, because it was perfect. It was perfect for my story. I rushed through the broken mess back to my desk and slammed myself into the seat. I pressed enter on the keyboard and started typing my next line. I wasn't exactly sure what the story was about, but I was certain this was the one. I opened my eyes and the butterflies were gone. I sat up straight, drawing in breath sharply as I looked at the clock. 12:07. I'd accidentally slept for 7 minutes. Incensed, I balled up my fists and hit myself in the head. Stupid. I had work to do. I had to stay awake. If I went for long enough without working, he would... I saw his eyes looking in through the cracked door and watched as his emotionless face erupted in a grin. "Quitting time?" he asked, poking a finger through the door. I pushed myself out of the side of my chair and fell tailbone first on the floor. "Don't worry, Nathan. I'm just checking on you. I heard that awful crash, and then there was silence. I was beginning to think something might have happened to you. I couldn't let that happen. That's my job. But you have to make the call. Though, guessing by how long you've been in here at this, I don't think there's much time left. Maybe I should wait close by." He pushed the door the rest of the way open with his pointed finger and strolled into the room, crunching the remaining vase shards under his shoeless feet. He sat down on the bed, sat with his feet crossed like a child, and winked before the emotionless look returned to his face. I couldn't take it anymore. Promise or not, this wasn't the story I'd wanted. Suddenly I was aware of a bulge of car keys in my left pocket and the mass of my wallet in my right. In what felt like one movement, I stood, yanked the door open, and tore down the hall, down the steps, out the front door and into my car. I'd left my shoes, kicked off under the desk, but I didn't care. Couldn't even bring myself to look up to see if he was following me. I had put my car in reverse and backed out of the driveway as fast as I could. I nearly dropped the transmission out of the car, slamming it into drive. I made it to a hotel on the other side of town. I must have scared the receptionist half to death with my bloody feet and bloodshot eyes, but she gave me a room, so I didn't care. Inside, I shuffled to the bed, closed my eyes, and fell onto the sheets face first. Click. I squeezed my eyes shut, racing towards sleep. Squeak. I was almost there. I could feel reality falling and twisting away, but I wasn't fast enough. "All out of ideas," he crooned. I reluctantly opened my eyes to find his mere inches away from mine.